huge thanks to you all for taking the time and trouble to be with us tonight. At the moment, we've got 133 people with us, which is both fantastic and hugely appreciated. The hope is that you'll find the next 90 minutes or so of real help as together we think about the future resourcing and financing of mission and ministry across our diocese. With that in mind, in a few minutes you'll hear from Diocesan Secretary Derek Hurton, who will further unpack the whys and wherefores of a move to looking at financial resourcing and the setting of the offer in the context of mission communities. There'll be a chance to ask questions after that and to discuss what Derek's had to say before our Head of Finance, Rick, explores how the language around the offer is changing. And then Stewardship Enabler Sophie Hodge will talk through the process over the coming months to help support everyone through this period of change. We're also delighted to say, and I hope he's here, that Richard Snow is with us, and we'll be able to talk through with Richard his experience of making things work financially in a mission community context. And then there'll be further opportunity to ask more questions. So a fair bit to pack in before all of that, but let's pause for some opening prayers with Archdeacon Richard Pratt. Richard.
Thank you. Let us pray. We praise you, Lord Jesus Christ, for your generosity. You were rich, yet for our sake you became poor, so that through your poverty we might become rich. May we be mindful that we hold our gifts, our talents, our possessions, our money, our life itself in trust for you, the service of your church, your world and your kingdom. And so from greed and avarice, from selfishness in getting and spending, from meanness and miserliness, deliver us, good Lord. And as we are entrusted with money belonging to others, help us to spend wisely. Help us ourselves to model generous giving. We make these prayers in the name of that same Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thanks, Richard. Just before we hand over to Derek, we thought it'd be just lovely to hear a few words of thanks and encouragement from the Bishop of Penrith, Bishop Rob.
Firstly, may I begin by thanking you all for taking the time and trouble to join this meeting tonight. I know that we've only just broken into the new year and that you all will have had a really busy time over Christmas with all manner of church-related duties. So it's really good of you to be here as together we look towards the future direction of travel around the funding of mission and ministry in our diocese. I don't need to tell you just how important the Parish Offer is in this regard. Your church's generous giving means that we can continue to commit to grow God's kingdom here in Cumbria. But there are, of course, growing challenges. The cost of living crisis continues to bite. Energy bills have rocketed, and the Parish Offer has fallen in recent years. But equally, there are opportunities for our churches as they come together in mission communities across Cumbria, groupings of mutually supportive churches with mission at their heart. Now is the right time to consider how their plans for mission and ministry can be resourced and financed in the future. In a short while, you'll hear much more about how together we can make that work. So, far from being downhearted about financial forecasts, rather I'd say we should be buoyed about the renewed possibilities that there are as we work together as one body in Christ. My prayer is that you feel energized by what you hear this evening, and that you have every opportunity to ask all those questions, any question that you feel prompted to. Thank you so much.
Thanks to Bishop Rob, and with that, it's over to Derek.
Good evening, everybody. I'm grateful for Bishop Rob for focusing our minds through the words he said in the film, and also for his positive sentiments. And personally, I want to reiterate Dave's thanks to all the people on the screen. Actually, I'd probably need about 4 screens to fit everyone on, but really grateful for people for turning out this evening and for the work that you do in so many ways, but particularly in financial ways, keeping the wheels of the local church and the diocese turning. What I'm going to do in my input now is first of all explain the direction of travel in relation to resourcing mission and ministry and how that approach is changing. And then secondly, I'm going to try to connect that to the diocesan vision and to the budget that's been set for the period from 2023 to 2027 by the Diocesan Board of Finance. And I'm conscious that for some of you, a lot of this will be new, and that the approach to this isn't just changing from today, but has been changing over the last few years, and has been changing at different speeds in different parts of the diocese. So for some of you, some of this may just be a reminder of changes you've already been through and have got to grips with. But I hope that all the people who are here tonight will find some elements of it helpful. Once I've made my input, we're going to have some time for question and discussion. So if what I say prompts questions or reflections, please get in touch. You might just start doing that via the chat. That's probably the easiest way. Or when I've finished, if people want to speak in person, they can raise their virtual hands in the way that Dave described. And we'll try to cover as many questions as possible in the time available. So I hope that sounds okay. I'll now get into the meat of what I want to say. And the process that we're talking about this evening, about evolving the parish offer, has actually been happening since 2018, when we reviewed how the parish offer was working after 10 years of it being the practice that we employ in the county to try to raise money for ministry from the local church. And we've been evolving it since 2018 in response to 2 main factors. And the first of those is the fact, and there's no blame attributable to this, it's just a fact, and I like to deal in facts. The level of parish offer has fallen significantly in real terms in the 10 years up to 2018, and it's actually fallen at a faster rate over that period. And I appreciate there are lots of factors in play in that, and we could probably have a long discussion about all the different factors. But there is some evidence that some of that, at least, is caused by the nature of the system and how it's operated. And then the second main factor in evolving the parish offer relates to mission communities and the way increasingly in which we're organised locally. And many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with the concept of mission communities, and they're not really the subject of tonight's event. But for those of you who may be in areas where the idea is less well developed, I just thought I might reiterate what I think Bishop Robert said about mission communities and be clear about what they are. So in my mind, a mission community is a group of churches, often including ecumenical partners, who collaborate together, who think more strategically locally about mission and ministry, and who support each other so that they're sustainable. And that's the way I sort of think about them. And it's important to recognise in that mission communities are not about undermining the central place of the local church within the diocese, but what they are about is recognising that many individual churches will struggle, and indeed are struggling, in a very fragmented system, whereas they're more sustainable as part of wider groups. They're about recognising that activities like developing lay ministry, working with schools, operating a food bank, etc., are often more effectively organised across a number of churches rather than by individual churches. And thirdly, that across a wider area, there's more scope to think more imaginatively about how we use the assets that God has given us as a church. So those are 3 ways in which the mission community concept makes a lot of sense. In terms of resourcing, actually, the development of mission communities recognises that our stipendiary ministry is deployed almost entirely across groups of churches rather than individual churches. And as mission communities become more established more widely, they become a natural unit for thinking about funding mission and ministry and the deployment of ministry. So if you take those two factors, one, applying what we've learned from reviewing the way the parish offer has operated, and put that together with the second factor, the creation of mission communities, that's resulted in us evolving our approach to the parish offer. And we've piloted a different approach through 2018 and 2019. We then, as you know, had some interruption to our business since then, but we've further applied sort of an evolution through incremental changes in 2021 and 22. And we've been learning from our experiences we've gone along. And we're now getting to a point where we think the new approach is more applicable across the piece. Although, as you'll hear later from Sophie, we're not going for a big bang, applying this everywhere in one go. So the point we want to get to is to introduce an approach which involves addressing three questions in a dialogue between the local church in mission communities and the episcopal, and bishops and archdeacons effectively. And those three questions sort of follow on one from another. And the first one is, what are the plans for mission in a place? The second is, how should ministry be shaped in support of those plans? And the third is, how can that ministry be funded, both by the local church through the offer, but also through scope for investment from the DBF, the Diocesan Board of Finance's other funds. And thinking financially, the end point of that process of asking those questions, we want to be that mission communities will be able to consider their aspirations for contributing towards the cost of local ministry, maybe as a percentage of the total cost, and then ultimately make an offer for a 3-year period. So I'll just repeat that. So through dialogue, we want to answer three questions. One, what are the local plans for mission? Second, what's the local ministry that's required in a place? And third, how will it be funded, with a view to a 3-year agreement with the mission community? So that's quite a big change from where we are now, although it's an evolution of the parish offer rather than being something completely different. And you might be sitting there asking, why do we think this is a good idea? Well, partly we think it tackles some of the issues we looked at in the review of the parish offer in 2018. And in that respect, we're doing it because fundamentally we think the offer is about raising the money we need to pay for the ministry we want to see. And we think this approach will help to tackle some of the reduction in offer that we've seen over the 10 years. But to me, what's really important about this is a more philosophical dimension. So to me, the change is about mission communities, groups of churches actually having more say in how their plans are resourced. So it's about empowering people locally to make decisions. It's about transparency in diocesan finances. So we're very clear when the money comes from and where it's spent. And thirdly, and most importantly, in terms of the sort of philosophy, this is about what I call the local episcopal partnership. So a genuinely two-sided approach where there's a local commitment from the local church to providing funding at an agreed level. And there's an episcopal commitment to an agreed model of deployment, so an agreed number of stipendiary clergy on the ground and other ministry, with vacancies filled as soon as possible, and as appropriate, a level of diocesan financial or other investment in that ministry. And I think that partnership is something which ought to be absolutely written through the diocese, like they're writing through a stick of Blackpool rock. But sometimes it doesn't feel that way. And I come back to this all the time, thinking when clergy are licensed to their ministry, they and the bishop commit to sharing the cure of souls locally. And I think the words used are, when the bishop hands over the license to the clergy person, receive this cure, which is both yours and mine. And to me, that's about a partnership between the episcopal and the local church. And that's an absolutely integral part of the Church of England. So we want to see that partnership reflected in how decisions are made to deploy local ministry and how it can be funded. And that to me is something which should always be there, but we want to make it more explicit and achieve it more through an explicit dialogue. between the local church and the episcopate, for want of a better expression. So that's the direction of travel that we want to go in, from a parish offer to this mission community-based offer based on dialogue around plans for mission, what ministries needed to fulfill that mission, and then how it's funded. So if I can just now spend a little bit of time connecting that to the God for All vision for the diocese and the diocesan budget. At the Diocesan Synod in October, Bishop James and Bishop Robert presented the refreshed vision for mission and how the church should be organised to go about it, and Synod approved a budget in support of that vision. And if you've been doing any financial planning recently in your local churches, you'll know as well as I do that the budget context is really tough. And I feel as if it would have been quite easy when we were trying to set a diocesan budget for the period from 23 to 27 to say, there's so much uncertainty. The trends of the last 10 years have been very much against us. So let's not bother. But we felt if we were having a vision for the next 5 years, we needed to have a budget that went with it. So we have set what I described when I was presenting it to Diocesan Synod as an ambitious but prudent and realistic but hopeful budget. And I just want to pull out 6 key points from the budget, which then relate into this question of the parish offer and how it's changing. And the first one of those is the budget is principally about investing in local ministry. It's predominantly about stipendiary clergy on the ground in parishes as part of mission communities, especially in less affluent areas, along with support for aspects of the God for All vision for the church in Cumbria. So that's the first thing. Why have we got a budget? Well, that's what it's about. The second important point is a change. So people who are probably a bit more into the range of ministries that we have will know that we have a number of network youth church leaders who lead network youth churches, which operate on a deanery basis. And we've shaped the budget so that the funding for the payroll for those posts comes from the Diocesan Board of Finance's investment income, rather than expecting it'll come out of the parish offer and the contribution from the local church. So that's in a way saying that's something which local churches don't need to worry about trying to raise the money for in future if that's one of the things they've been doing in the past, and that'll come out of a central resource instead. A third point out the budget is that any other of what you might call initiatives, so ideas to try to help the local church become more effective or introduce new mission initiatives. So work we might want to do supporting churches with their digital offer, or initiatives are under the heading of growing younger or church planting. Any initiatives like those that are developed in the next few years will have to be funded externally by grants, particularly from the church commissioners or other partners. So there's no call on the Diocesan Board of Finance's mainstream funds to support those, because the budget's very tight and the emphasis is on investing in local ministry on the ground. The fourth point from the budget I just want to draw out is that the amount we're expecting to raise in parish offer is substantially less than the cost of local ministry. So the Board of Finance will be putting significant sums from its other income each year into funding the cost of local ministry, and across the 5 years of the budget, we'll be committing the best part of £500,000 from historic surpluses to cover what would otherwise be a deficit. And then finally, a couple of key points out the budget that relate to the offer. The aim is to increase stipend in line with inflation. And then from 2024, for the overall offer to increase more or less in line with the increase in stipends. So when we say the cost of local ministry has gone up by X%, 2, 3, 4% or whatever, that'll be fairly clearly linked to the increase in the stipend. So you get a sense of why the costs have gone up and therefore why we would like the offer to go up in relation to that. In terms of the last of those, this business about stipends and offer matching inflation and offer matching stipends, I have to say, if you're doing financial planning like us, you'll be keeping a close eye on inflation forecasts from the Bank of England and other reputable economic institutions. It looks as if inflation is going to come down through 2023. That's what all the forecasters are saying. But they're also saying it's going to come down more slowly than they were saying it would just 3 or 4 months ago when we were setting the budget. So our current assessment, our current assumption is that that Parish Offer, to keep pace with the increase in ministry costs, would have to rise by about 4% in 2024, 3% in 2025, and 2 to 2.5% thereafter. And the 2 to 2.5%, those of you who follow any part of the economy and economics will know that the 2 to 2.5% is just above the Bank of England's target figure for inflation. So we have to assume that in the medium term, the Bank of England will get inflation under control, and that's what we'll be looking at. But as I say, our assumptions are for 2024, probably a 4% increase in Parish Offer, in 2025, a 3% increase, and then 2 to 2.5% thereafter. Now, those figures, if we quoted those figures 3 years ago, people probably thought they were quite high. In today's inflationary environment, they don't seem as high at all. However, I want to make it really clear that Synod and the Bishops' Council and the DBF trustees set the budget for 23 to 27, recognising that in achieving those levels of Parish Offer increase would be quite an achievement given what's happened over the last decade. And I want to reassure that they didn't just say, oh, well, that'll be fine in a blithe sort of way. They recognise that the budget is ambitious, but they also recognise that it's hopeful. And that if we believe in the local church and if we believe in our vision for the diocese, then we need to be realistic about what it costs to support and fund the ministry, and therefore those numbers have to be taken really seriously. We recognise that there'll be challenging numbers to achieve, and that if we're going to achieve them, we're going to have to invest quite a lot of time and energy, particularly in communication and in the dialogue with the local church that I was talking about. The figures don't mean that every church will just be expected to give 4% more next year. We hope that churches that could give a bit more on top of that to help others will want to do so. And through the dialogue, I have to be honest that in some places, there will have to be some fairly robust conversations where the absolute levels and trends in the offer as compared to the cost of ministry feel as if they've got out of sorts. And there aren't lots of places like that, but there are some. So I've got to be honest that this dialogue we're talking about will have to be quite robust in some places. Reasons to be positive about achieving these increases are that in 2023, the offers for 23 have shown the highest increase that we've had for 10 years. And that's bucked a trend, which has been going on obviously for quite a long time. And I'm really grateful for the efforts that local churches have made in increasing their offers for 23. And I'm positive because the places where we've had the most dialogue and the most engagement are the places where the offer increase has been biggest. So we think there's a correlation between engagement and dialogue and understanding and sharing our thinking and achieving a higher offer. There are also some reasons to be cautious about being able to achieve those numbers. And one is obviously we're in the middle of economic turmoil with energy prices the way they are and the cost of living the way it is. And we've also got to understand that one swallow doesn't make a summer. So a good year, which could partly reflect a bounce back after COVID, doesn't necessarily mean that we can easily achieve 3 or 4% in future years. So I'm cautious about that. But essentially, if we don't try to achieve what I've laid out in terms of the 4% and 3% and then 2 and a bit percent, if we don't achieve that, then we'll end up having to keep salami slicing clergy numbers. And we're at a point where I think the elastic is going to snap. So it doesn't really bear thinking about in terms of an alternative, in terms of deficits and impact on clergy numbers. So I feel a bit as if the next few years, we're coming to a bit of a test financially. So I'm saying, let's have a go and see how we can do, rather than just feeling a bit resigned to what's been happening over the last decade. So that's the aim, where we're trying to get with the system, and how it fits with the diocesan budget. That's the end of what I wanted to say in input. Thanks very much for your attention, and I'll now hand back to Dave, I think, who's going to manage the question and answer session.
Thanks, Derek, and thanks to those people who posted questions so far. And my questions have just gone off my screen, which doesn't help. John, I don't know whether you just pressed something, which means that I've lost my questions. The back. Thank you. So the first question comes from Sarah McNeil, who asks, is this model something that is unique to our area in terms of the working through mission communities, or is it being rolled out in other dioceses too? Derek, I don't know whether you'd pick up on that with your collaboration with other diocesan sects.
Yeah, okay. I wasn't quite clear from the question whether this was about the parish offer, mission community offer model, or whether it was about mission communities in general. Mission communities are an approach which has been used in a number of dioceses. Manchester are just in the process of going wholeheartedly for a mission community approach. The approach started in Exeter Diocese, probably, well over 10 years ago. Liverpool Diocese is doing something that they're calling single larger parishes, which are effectively like mission communities, but where the group in the churches is a single parish. So it's not something which we are doing on our own. There are other places that are doing variations on it. In terms of the approach to the offer, different dioceses, every different diocese seems to have a slightly different approach. There are some dioceses that still work on a formula basis. So they effectively collect a lot of data and tell local churches how much they need to contribute based on a formula, which is what we used to do prior to 2008. The idea of having dialogue within the system is a feature in quite a few dioceses. London Diocese, for instance, brings people together in deaneries to agree how they're going to effectively divide up the costs between them. And other dioceses have a sort of dialogue built into the process. There are quite a few dioceses who operate this on the basis of an offer. So they say to people, what do you want to contribute? With some associated information, which is what we've done in the past. I think what I would say is what we're trying to move to recognizes what we've learned from reviewing how we got on in the 10 years up to 2018. So we did quite a lot of work with a group of mission communities and groups of churches to ask them how the existing system operated and what we could do to improve it. And what we've got is that I've explained a bit about, and Sophie will talk more about later in terms of the process, is an attempt to build on what those conversations told us.
Thanks, Derek. And Sarah has clarified it is the mission community and the link to offer. So thanks for that. A question from Stephen Tudway, who asked, what will be the full-time equivalent deployment of NYC ministers, that's Network Youth Church ministers, funded by the diocese? Again, Derek, that may well be yours.
So the long-term goal is to have the equivalent of a full-time Network Youth Church minister in each deanery. So that would be 11. At the moment, we have 8 active Network Youth Churches, and we have 2 locations who are intended to come on stream. What we've done with the budget is build in the current levels of staffing, because not every Network Youth Church is a full-time post at the moment. So for the start of the budget period, we said if there are, 4 full-time and 3 part-time roles, that's what we'll have going into 2023. But we would like to be able to expand those roles so that they were as big as was necessary in each location. Obviously, there's some differences between population sizes or geographical areas between deaneries, so you could reflect those in the amount of resource that's allocated. But the ideal would be a full-time role in each of our 11 deaneries.
Thanks, Derek. We have a question from Kate Hoare, who asks, what's the cost of stipend stroke local ministry with and without the diocese funding to cover shortfall? I appreciate there are lots of variables, but a figure to quote on cost of the ministry would be very useful, so our PCC can understand what they're paying for. For example, what's the cost of a vicar taking a service within a mission team? Rick, I don't know whether you can draw on that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not going to quote exact figures. What I will say though is every year we try and provide the figure that each unit of resource, if you like, in a mission community or a parish costs to you. Part of the comms process that Sophie's going to talk about in the sort of second half of this session is probably going to cover that to a degree. What we look at every year is the costs of employing, housing, training our clergy, our curates, and some of the other activity that goes on. And then we sort of divide that out, if you like, over each member of our clergy to come up with an average cost, because obviously it's not just what they get paid, it's all their housing and training and also bringing on the next generation of clergy, so ordination training and that sort of thing. So we typically come out with a figure each year of what we believe it's going to cost to cover the cost of each person in the clergy. It's in the region of £65,000, which sounds a lot. We then break it down to help you to understand that, and as we've done a few times in previous years, we're going to try and communicate really clearly this year so that you as parishes can understand what makes up that figure and what is being paid for. I don't know if you want to add anything at this stage, Sophie, or if you're going to cover that in your session.
Yeah, I guess it will come up, but just to say, I will actually be writing to all PCC treasurers at the end of January or beginning of February with some key information from tonight. And part of that key information will be what the cost of a vicar is estimated to be for next year. But we'll also include some other roles in there as well, like house for duty, priests or administrators or children's and family workers. So we will try and be really clear to you about how much it costs to have different types of ministers to help you with those conversations. And we really appreciate you as PCC treasurers and clergy people in making that clear to your PCCs, because we think it's really helpful information for them to know when they come to discuss this. But yeah, we'll write to you with that really clearly in the next few weeks.
Thanks, Sophie. Just to reiterate that people can also ask questions in person, so please don't forget to raise your hand virtually if you wish to do so. This is a video conference, it's every opportunity for you to do so, and we welcome the opportunity to answer as many questions as possible. There's one here for Derek from Gina Barney, who talks about any potential uplifts for the consumer price index or retail price index in the figures.
Okay, so I guess, Gina, I can introduce you to LMI, which is local ministry inflation, which is another measure of inflation. So when we look at the £65,000-ish figure that Rick talks about, that goes up by what I call local ministry inflation, which reflects the changes in costs when it comes to ordination training, cost of curates, housing, etc., etc. So that's a very specific, if you like, rate of inflation that applies to local ministry. It's not usually that far off CPI, to be honest. If we're thinking about uplift to stipends, then CPI is the natural place to start. I would quite like a more sophisticated version which strips out some elements of housing cost, because clergy are obviously provided with housing. Their council tax and water's covered. So a measure of inflation which is cost of living excluding direct elements of housing would be the best measure that we could use. So we look at CPI and CPIX, and actually the National Church does a lot of work around sort of what is a reasonable increase in the national minimum stipend based on those sorts of factors, and we can then typically look at that and benchmark ourselves against that, and we tend to be not far off the national church's increase in national minimum stipend.
Thanks, Derek.
I should just say, Dave, I mean, if anyone wants a more detailed conversation about some of the, what you might call the technical side of this, really happy to do that. And in the past, not tonight, but by email or on the phone, in the past, we have had people who are very interested in how we do the calculations, etc. And I think it's really important that you feel able to ask us as many detailed questions about that as you would like, because I think that the figures we quote are completely justifiable and we want them to be 100% transparent. So if you are thinking, crikey, that 65,000 sounds a lot, or, well, I thought the stipend was only about 29, so where does the other 36 go? I'm quite confident that we will be able to explain to you, if not to your liking, at least very clearly what the costs are and where the money goes.
Thanks, Derek. A question from Martin Rayner, who asks, can we raise our parish offer? If we raise our parish offer, can we raise the number of people to serve our mission community? I just wonder whether Derek and maybe Richard can touch on that.
Do you want me to go first, or you go first, Richard?
You go first, Derek.
Okay. The answer is yes, I think, is the crude answer. I do think we'll be having some conversations in some places where the parish offer is significantly below the cost of ministry, to say, given the socioeconomic nature of this part of the diocese, do you think it's really reasonable to expect other churches or other sources of income to cover part of your cost of ministry? So in some of those places, I think there's probably a case for the parish offer rising to a level that's reasonable before we start to talk about additional ministry. But in principle, we're very open to conversations with people about raising more offer and raising the amount of ministry. I suppose the qualification that I always make with that is that we are a diocesan, episcopally led church, not a network of entirely free churches. So the bishop does have a role in ensuring that we provide for the cure of souls across the whole of the county, and it's not just everyone pays for what they get. So it isn't purely and simply, well, once you've paid your 65,000, if you raise a bit more, you can have another vicar, because the numbers have to be seen in the round. And if a church can, or group of churches can more than cover their cost of ministry, there must be a question as to whether they can't contribute more in order to help those areas who can contribute less. So, we have more and less affluent bits of the county, and we don't expect everyone just to say, bang, here's your price tag, you've got to meet that. We've got to look across the piece a bit more than that. Richard, do you want to add to that?
Yes, so we've actually got some examples, live examples across the county where churches have raised extra money to have extra ministry. And in fact, the offer was always designed right from the very start, in contrast to the parish share, to say that it was appropriate for churches, and it was just churches in those days rather than mission communities, to, as it were, raise extra money to invest locally. I think we always said that, didn't we? So the short answer is yes. As Derek said, one but is, it wouldn't be right, would it, that a very wealthy parish had 10 clergy, and the neighbouring or somewhere else in the county, a very poor parish, poor mission community, was struggling with one. So there's bound, if you like, the bishop and the archdeacons want to have a bit of a voice to say, is that fair? Perhaps when you're raising extra money for your extra ministry, you could think about raising some of that also being raised for extra ministry elsewhere. The other thing is, if it's clergy extra ministry, you'll need to go through the diocese, because they'll need a bishop's license, and also they'll need a clergy pension, which are paid through the diocese. So you can't completely sidestep the diocese. But the other thing is, of course, that you might want to have extra ministry that wasn't clergy, that was lay ministry. I mean, some churches employ youth workers, for example, or parish administrators, and all of those are extra ministry as well, aren't they? And they allow other bits of ministry to happen too. So there's the answer is very much yes, and it's worth having a conversation.
Thanks, Richard. I'm just mindful of the time, so if we don't get through all the questions this evening, please be assured that we've got a note of them on the meeting chat, and we will get back to you accordingly. But maybe just one final question before we move on to the next section with Rick and Sophie. That's from Sheila, who's just slightly confused and needs some clarification around the 2023 offer. She says, I didn't realise that the 2023 offer had been agreed already. I'm a new treasurer. As it's on a direct debit, will whatever the figure is just be taken from the bank account? Rick, I wonder whether you could be drawn on that.
Yeah, we don't take any money. We don't actually have the facility to do direct debit. Direct debit is when we take money out of your account, and we're not allowed to do that. So all of your parish offers are actually paid either by standing order, where you tell your bank to send it to us, or others do it by internet banking or sending us checks and that sort of thing. So this is all about conversation, and the process Sophie's going to be explaining shortly. We'll be coming out to you again shortly to explain how it all works. We're conscious there's quite a lot of new treasurers out there in the last year or two as well, so we're going to be working quite particularly hard this year to explain process and that kind of thing, but that's probably more that Sophie's going to deal with.
Thanks very much, Rick. Again, can I just remind people, if you're not presenting, if you can just ensure you're muted, that'd be fantastic. There's plenty more time for questions later on, and please don't forget to keep those questions coming in via the chat facility, and please do ask questions in person. But now it's actually back to Rick, who can briefly talk through some of the changes in language we can expect to see as a result of the new financial modelling. You're on mute, Rick.
I'm sorry, I did click it, but it obviously didn't work. Derek's obviously explained the really important stuff about what we're trying to achieve here, and it's at the end of the day, it's about how can we resource doing as much great ministry around the county as we possibly can, and that's the absolute key message of tonight. Why are we changing it? We're trying to change it or evolve it to do the very best that we can as church, as God's people in Cumbria. Sophie's going to talk about the mechanics and the process and timetables and stuff like that, which is also really important. It's not as fundamental, but it's also really keen that treasurers and PCCs and clergy understand the process, how this journey, I often refer to it as a journey, how that's going to take place. And so Sophie's going to cover that. So I'm kind of the light entertainment in the middle, and I'm just got a couple of minutes to talk about the language that we're using around resourcing ministry going forward. And the reason we're doing this is because we've hit a few issues and a few problems as this journey of change has taken place. We increasingly find ourselves using very confused sentences and phrases, and so we've done a bit of consultation and discussion over the autumn with various groups as to what language, what phraseology is the most helpful. The phrase parish offer itself has actually started to become a little confused, because we found ourselves saying things like parish offer set in a mission community, or a mission community level parish offer, and we kind of get this sort of these confused looks of what on earth are you talking about, and we confuse ourselves. So we've had a bit of a look at this. Now, I really want to say we're not going to get too hung up. I'm not going to lose a huge amount of sleep over whatever you decide to call it. We still, probably a third of the correspondence coming in still refers to it as parish share. We get the odd mention of quota and the odd, the money that we send you lot in Penrith, or whatever you choose to call it. So in a way, this isn't a big deal, but we do want to try and clarify why we're changing this a little bit. And as it says at the bottom of this slide, we're going to move to the phraseology ministry offer rather than parish offer, because it reflects exactly what it is. It's an offer of finance to fund the ministry that we're doing. We're not taking the word parish out because we don't think parish is important. Parish is clearly unbelievably important in all this, but because we're setting it in a mission community context increasingly, we think the word ministry offer is going to be, is just less confusing going forward. It will no doubt take years and years for us to get the hang of it, and I'll still be having lots of people referring to it as parish share in 10 years' time. So I'm not going to lose any sleep over this, but we will start to refer to it as ministry offer because it gets a little less confusing when we have these conversations. So that's the first change. The second one is around the word covenant, which you've heard a little bit around tonight, and in some of the communications over the last few years, we've used this word covenant. It actually came out of one of the first mission communities to adopt this approach. What is a covenant? Well, it's this attempt to say that we will work together over the next 3 years. We'll try and pay you this, and you'll try and resource us in this way. That's what the covenant is. And it came out of the first mission community that wanted to do this with us. In their case, it was ecumenical. So it involved Methodists and Anglicans coming together with these are our costs. This is how we're going to fund it. Some money goes to the Anglican Church, some money goes to the Methodist Church. And we'll call it a covenant. And it's been really successful and actually really helpful. But as we've taken that conversation out wider, the term covenant has proved quite divisive in some places, hence the Marmite. Some people love it, find it really helpful. It's a biblical concept of covenant. It's a helpful phrase. Others have found it unhelpful. But in some areas, it's seen in a different context. It's perhaps used in a different way. And in some people have told us that if we use covenant, it's a real turn-off. It's actually a hindrance to the process. We've consulted lots of people about this, and that was incredibly inconclusive, again reflecting the fact that some people liked it and some didn't. Some people also thought it had rather sort of undertones of a legal agreement or something really binding, and I've had more than one person say to me, well, I don't want us to set a 3-year deal, because what if life changes and we can't pay it? And we don't want that sense of fear, for want of a better word, or concern that we're going to make this agreement in good faith, but then we can't meet it. So all these things have been sort of swirling around, and we know that whatever we agree on this, some will love it, some will hate it, and we're trying to find something that kind of helps the process along. So going forward, the language that we're going to use when we communicate out with you is a partnership agreement. Now, its longer name might be mission and ministry partnership agreement, but that's quite a mouthful. So I'm sure that we'll generally refer to it as a partnership agreement, because that's what it is. It's an agreement that you in your parishes and your mission communities work in partnership with the diocese and the bishops to resource and carry out ministry across the county. So we're going to increasingly go out with these phrases. We'll try and communicate a bit more on that. And as I say, it's not a huge deal. It's the language we're going to use going forward. But, whatever you call it, we'll run with it. So that's all I was going to say. You can ask us questions after Sophie if you want to on that. Over to Sophie.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Rick. I think my biggest challenge is going to be to use the right terminology in this presentation immediately preceding yours. Okay, so we've heard quite a lot about theory. In the next 10 minutes, I'm going to hopefully shed some light on what this will look like in practice. So what are the timelines? What are the key dates? What are we hoping we'll see happen? And what's your role as treasurers or PCC members or clergy people in making that happen? Before I get into that nitty-gritty, I thought it might be helpful to just remind people of the process we went through last year in order to set 2023 offers. So last year, parishes would have fallen into one of three groups. So we had three slightly different systems operating, and that will continue for this year as well. So parishes will fall into one of these three groups. Either last year you were in group one and were setting your ministry offer parish by parish, much as you've been asked to do for the last 10 years. We hope that within those conversations at PCC level, you as treasurers and clergy people would have had a really key role to play in those conversations, that you would have shared key information with your PCC, such as what the costs of ministry are, how much they've increased by, etc. And last year, we asked treasurers in this group to let us at the diocese know your parish offer by the 29th of July 2022, and almost all parishes did that. So thank you very much indeed for your efforts in making that happen. We then had a second group of parishes, and they were parishes that were asked to come together and start thinking about this idea of setting an offer as a mission community. And for many of our mission communities who did that this year, or sorry, last year for this year's offer, that was perhaps the first time that they'd had those conversations. So parishes, if you fell into this category, you probably would have come together as a mission community to start thinking about the resourcing of mission and ministry in your locality collectively. We hope that those conversations would have involved as many parishes represented as possible. In some mission communities who are working very effectively ecumenically, they would have involved ecumenical partners as well. But there were plenty of examples where they were just Anglican, and that's fine as well. And often these conversations involved representation from the diocese. So that was often through the archdeacon and sometimes through the finance team here as well. So those conversations would have looked at things like what the situation was in your particular patch locality, the mission and ministry you currently have or would like to have, and how together we can finance that through the ministry offer or through the DBF funds that Derek mentioned as well. So that was a bulk of parishes. And then we had a few parishes who went on to set a partnership agreement with us. So this was the thing that used to be called covenant. So that was really an extension of the mission community conversations, where actually we put down an agreement that covered a 3-year period, which typically set out what the parish offer would be, or the parish offer aspiration. So perhaps to pay 100% of your costs of ministry or 110% of your cost of ministry, and also what the deployment model was going to be in that mission community for the duration of the partnership agreement. So those are the categories that your parishes would have fallen into. As Derek said earlier, we recognised that we couldn't just move everyone straight onto a partnership agreement because mission communities are in different places. So we're trying to do this sensitively and gradually, but we're also obviously encouraging people to kind of to build momentum here. And we hope that in the coming year, people who might have, some of the parishes that were operating parish by parish last year will look at setting a mission community offer this year, and some of the mission communities that set a mission community offer this year will look at setting a partnership agreement next year. Okay, so that's what we did for our 2023 offers. once all those offers came in, we then just took a bit of a moment to just pause and reflect on how the process had worked, how we felt those conversations had gone, where we felt we could perhaps support mission communities better next year in doing this. And we also met with mission community leaders. We held a couple of focus groups to hear their experiences of how this process had landed on the ground, what had been the benefits, where the challenges had been. So we tried to kind of listen to how this had worked before setting the process that I'm about to share with you for the 2024 offers. And I have to say, actually, that was a really positive time of reflection. Mission community leaders in particular were really positive about that process of setting a mission community offer, particularly where that had happened by sitting around a table with the mission community and the diocese to have this kind of shared conversation around mission and ministry and how together we fund that. And this key kind of word that kept coming back to us was that genuine sense of partnership that it's engendered. So that was really positive. And of course, the feedback that we saw in the 2023 offers, which again, Derek's mentioned, that uplift, which we've not seen for a decade, was obviously a really positive reflection on the 2023 process. So thank you everyone for your work there, and also thank you for the faith and generosity that we know those offers represented. Okay, so what are we suggesting for the coming year? If John wouldn't mind going through to the next slide. As I said before, I will be writing to treasurers, every PCC treasurer, at the end of January or beginning of February, and that letter will include all of the dates that I'm about to share with you here. So please don't feel you need to madly scribble everything down. You will get a letter with this timeline on. But it's probably helpful for me to run through it now. The first thing we wanted to do this year, which we've not done in previous years, is actually bring treasurers and some clergy and PCC members together to just talk to them about what we're doing and why, explain the rationale, explain the process, and to give you the opportunity to respond and ask questions. We know that treasurers and clergy people are really, really key in this process. And so we wanted you to feel very much aware of what was going on and why, and have that opportunity to ask questions. So that's what we're doing tonight. So thank you for making the time for that. The next part of the process is really these conversations that we've talked about a lot. So this is what we received the most positive feedback about, and for us is a really key part of the process. And that is for those mission communities who are going to be looking at a mission community level offer or a partnership agreement for the 2024 offers, actually trying to get together around a table with the mission community and the diocese in as many places as possible, to have these conversations around what the resourcing of the mission community might look like, and together how we work together to fund that. So those conversations will typically happen between January and March. We've got the first ones happening in the next couple of weeks. The other benefit that we hope that you'll find is that it will be an opportunity for treasurers within a mission community to come together, often to start talking about this stuff and sharing these ideas together for the first time. And I know that treasurers have found that kind of relationship building opportunity really helpful as well. I did see there was a question in the chat about the kind of ecumenical dimension and how do we know what ecumenical partners are paying. Where a mission community is operating ecumenically, that can be partly where these conversations come in. So if you do have your ecumenical partners in that meeting, then that's really the opportunity to kind of start having these kind of very open, transparent conversations. And that has happened quite effectively in a number of places. Okay, so those meetings are really key. That will happen between January and March. Between April and June is when we hope that individual PCCs will set their ministry offer. Oh, if you could just go back, sorry. It's important to make clear that the ministry offer is still set at PCC level. So individual PCCs are still the bodies of people that have responsibility for making the offer, and that will continue to be the case. But we hope that when PCCs have their individual conversations about what the ministry offer is going to be, that the information that was discussed in the meeting at the mission community leaders, the mission community meeting, will be fed into the PCCs and will be part of that decision-making process. So that's why we hope that most parishes will be represented at that meeting, so that then they can feed back to their PCCs at the point they discuss what their ministry offer will be. I've said there that we hope that PCCs will discuss their individual ministry offers between April and June. I know that this might be slightly earlier than some PCCs have traditionally set their offer. So it might be worth, if your PCC generally has that conversation in July or September, it might be worth making a note that that conversation needs to happen slightly earlier in the year. Once PCCs have agreed their ministry offer, we will ask them to let their mission community leader know what their offer is. And so then the mission community leader can obviously get a picture of what the sum total of the ministry offers is for their mission community. And they will then have a feel of whether this matches the sorts of aspirations that were discussed in that initial meeting. So has it reached their parish offer aspiration? Is it kind of reasonable in terms of the mission and ministry you're hoping to see in your mission community? So the mission community leader will then have a feel for that, and will be able to feed that back to the individual parishes. Next slide, please. The ministry offers offered during the admission of church wardens. This might feel quite new to a lot of parishes and a lot of treasurers here. It's something that's been done in the West Archdeaconry, but as far as I'm aware, it's not happened in the North and South Archdeaconries. But the idea is really that we want to see our ministry offers as part of our communal corporate worship in the same way we would our individual giving and offering. So how we envisage this might happen is you might have a joint service, such as an admission of church wardens, or it could be some other joint mission community service where ministry offers will be written on a piece of paper, placed in an envelope and put on a collection plate, and then that can be prayed over and incorporated into worship in the same way you might a general collection. We then hope that mission community leaders will let the diocese know of their mission community's ministry offer by the 29th of July 2023. Now, where, as is the case in most places, individual parishes are going to continue to pay their own offers, we'll need a breakdown of what the individual parish's offer is within that, but the mission community leader will provide that in the context of their mission community offer. And then finally, where appropriate, if mission communities feel ready to go into a 3-year partnership agreement with the diocese, that will be put together in August and September. And there will be some kind of follow-up, some kind of touching base in September, just to talk to mission communities to see how this has gone. That might just be the Archdeacon making contact with the mission community leader, or it might be a kind of wider meeting with the mission community, depending on what you want or what's appropriate for you. So that's the process that we hope most parishes will fall into. That's specifically for those parishes who are going to be looking at a mission community offer this year, or a partnership agreement this year. For those parishes that are going to continue a parish by parish offer for this year, the process will look very, very similar to last year, and will be outlined in the letter that goes out to you shortly. John, if you could just put my last slide up. Oh, sorry, yeah, next one, the next one. Yeah, next steps. I forgot what I'd called it then. So yeah, just to clarify, I'll be writing to all PCC treasurers end of January, beginning of February. That letter will clarify whether we hope that your parish will be doing a parish by parish offer this year, or whether we'll hope to work with you towards a mission community offer or a partnership agreement. We will have consulted with mission community leaders before writing to you, so it won't be us just randomly deciding. It will be us in consultation with your mission community leaders. And then that letter will also contain everything that we hope that you'll need to know to see this process through. So the dates and the timelines I've just shared with you, that will be in the letter. We'll have the costs of ministry in that letter for 2024, so for vicars, house for duty, administrators, etc. Yeah, and anything else that we think is useful. We'll have a bit of information about how we spend Parish Offer and how it funds ministry across the diocese. But the point of that information is for you to share with your PCC at the point you discuss the ministry offer. Of course, we'll obviously take questions now, but any questions that come up throughout this period, please do just drop me an email, sophie.hodge@carlislediocese.org.uk, and I'm happy to help people on a one-to-one basis. And then the deadline that we're keeping the same as last year is the 29th of July. So we hope that date will be etched in people's minds, either that treasurers will be directly letting us know their offer because they're doing an individual parish offer, or mission community leaders will be letting us know their offer by that date. So I hope that was a little bit clear, but I'll certainly take questions now and answer any questions where I can.
Okay, thanks, Sophie. We'll come on to questions in just a few minutes' time, if that's okay. So if you've got any questions, please do note them down or ask them in person. And also, just to reiterate, Sophie will be sending out a letter which details everything which she's talked about so comprehensively in the last few minutes to help people through. Okay, so at this point, we thought it'd be really good to hear from someone who's actually been through the process that we're talking about. So I'm delighted to say that we're joined by, well, I hope we're joined by Richard Snow, who's Mission Community Leader for the Kirkby Lonsdale Mission Community. So the plan's to chat with Richard for 5 minutes or so and to draw on his experiences of the financial planning and resourcing of ministry within a mission community context. Richard, are you there?
I am. I'm here.
Thank the Lord. Thanks for joining us. So if we can just begin by, can you describe to us how the churches and perhaps particularly the treasurers in your context, in your mission community context, work together to arrive at your combined ministry offer?
Okay, yeah. I mean, just to sort of preface that, we've approached this slightly on a slightly different path, because when the Kirkby Lonsdale team was set up, it was set up as a single parish, not as a united benefice. So we've always kind of been having to approach, coming up with a single parish offer from a group of churches. With all the joys and frustrations of that, 8 churches, so we've got 8 different views of fairness, 8 different views of generosity, 8 different views of what the other churches should be doing. I think one of the helpful things, though, is transparency, that the churches know the financial positions of the other treasurers, know the kind of the situation, and we've had meetings where we've brought the treasurers together. And so they've been able to share how things look to them and listen to how things look from other people's perspectives. But I would say perhaps in our context, one of the most critical things and helpful things has been the degree of trust and respect that the PCC treasurer has built up over the years, because he's the one who can have that overview of the combined resources of the churches, and the ability of each of them to contribute, which is very different from each of the churches. So he can help the PCC understand the overall financial situation, and say, look, we're addressing this together as a group. And so in the last couple of years, it's actually been possible for the PCC treasurer to present a proposal to the 8 churches of what each might contribute. taking into account their different financial positions, their different abilities to pay, the cost of ministry, and our aspiration to fund our ministry. And it's been received remarkably well. But I think that's because of the respect and the trust that's been built up over the years. I mean, the caveat is that when it goes down to the individual churches, they can't just disagree with their bit. They're allowed to, but they then have to come up with a proposal that covers the other church, all of the churches as well. And that would come back to the PCC and have to be voted on. And they haven't on that. So I think, that transparency is important, but that degree of trust in someone who has an overview and an understanding of the assets, the combined assets, and the different abilities that churches have, to contribute from that, and a sense of, we'll tackle this together, folks, by bringing those resources together.
Have you found through the process, Richard, that by tackling the process together, as you've just outlined, that there have been instances, for instance, where one church has realised that sacrificial giving needs to be given to support another church, and as such has fostered better relationships between the 8 churches within your local context?
Yeah, I mean, so the abilities are radically different across the churches. And I mean, for example, during the pandemic, the way we responded when some churches do have reserves, other churches rely on social events through the year, which were just impossible. How they supported, how we could sort of address that. We were able to do. But I think it was done with that sort of being initiated from the PCC treasurer and that understanding that we're in this together. We tackle this together.
Do you think the process has helped with the development of your mission community?
Yes, it has. I think probably what's helped is thinking about ministry, and then the offer kind of fitting with that. I think I would looking back, I would say a key, really helpful point on the journey a few years ago, pre-pandemic. We had a kind of parish away day workshop where we really kind of wanted to think about what level of ministry would we like to have, and what could we realistically afford, as we thinking for the coming years, and also what level of ministry might be available, because we knew at that time stipendiary numbers were decreasing. And that was a really useful discussion, and we ended up the outcome of that was we felt we could see that we could fund and would like to have 1.5 stipendiary ordained to maintain the kind of the worshipping life of the churches, hopefully develop it and offer that priestly ministry to our communities. But we also wanted a sort of pioneering resource, really kind of freed from that to do much, mission stuff. And so we had that sort of clear picture of that's the sort of ministry we felt we would like to have and felt we could pay for. And then kind of immediately, having sort of thought about that, it then triggered the sort of ecumenical discussion, particularly around the pioneer, because we then thought, well, let's sit down. And we got an ecumenical task group together and said, okay, in our context, what could this pioneering be? And we where do we have really good contact with people, but really don't seem to have much impact? And it was sort of baptisms and families, and from that grew the family project as an idea. And then we thought, right, we want to fund a full-time project leader to undertake that work. How can we fund that together? So I think it was sort of thinking about ministry and thinking about mission, and then, okay, how together can we enable this to happen with the resources that we've got?
So in essence, the ministry offer process has enabled you to think about mission and ministry in new ways.
Yes. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. And through a wonderful sort of Kairos opportunity of when we sort of thought that 1.5 sort of priest for the kind of the parish. The Methodist Circuit at the same time was looking at its deployment, and through just a throwaway conversation with Wendy Thornton, just casual remark, we gave that opportunity to make Wendy's appointment, who's half-time in the Methodist Circuit and half-time in the Rainbow Parish.
That's great. I suppose that the final question would be, Richard, one of the aims of this process is to help mission communities have a greater sense of ownership at grassroots level about how ministries are shaped. And from what you're saying, that's played out where you are. You feel that sense of ownership.
Yeah, yes, we do. I think that's the way we've approached it. And I think, for most people, certainly in our context, individual church councils, the focus is very much the local community. It's not mission community. And I think that's right, because, the mission community is not the be all and end all. It's not something that sits above the local, I think, as Derek was saying. The purpose of the mission community is to enable the local to flourish, to be that prayerful, loving, serving presence in every community. But it's vital because, the mission community, by being together, we can dream the dreams and do things that the individual churches could never do on their own and benefit from. And I think, what we can point to are things like, Wendy's appointment, particularly the family project, and the individual churches can say, yes, we could never do that on our own. And actually, we're benefiting locally from it, but it's only been possible because we're a mission community.
That's fantastic. I really appreciate the time you've taken to be with us, Richard, and hopefully that your positivity shines through. So thank you so much for that.
Okay.
So we've got about 15 minutes or so left for final questions, and maybe if we've got some more questions that have come through, please, guys, we'll answer them as best we can. I'm just getting the chat facility in front of me again. Just a practical thing. There's a request, Sophie, for these slides to be sent through as useful feedback to PCC. I'm sure we can make that work in terms of your slides. Is that okay? Great.
And the information that I put in the Treasurer's letter will be almost word for word the timeline that you've seen this evening as well.
Okay, that's great. One question from Charles Edgerton, which maybe Richard you can draw on here, if that's okay. And he asks, how are mission community leaders chosen?
Okay, so the answer is that there's a kind of a role description. It actually does need to be updated, and that's one of the jobs we'll have to do this year. But certainly in the West, for example, what we've tended to only have one applicant for each mission community leaders post, but they have been interviewed, and it's been a separate interview. So if they're already in post, then we've actually interviewed them, and there's been a group of people from the mission community doing that interview. Or if they're applying to the post and to the mission community leadership post as well, then we've kept it as two separate interviews at the same time. So a role description, an interview, and an appointment. It's not very different from the process of appointing a new vicar, actually.
Thanks, Richard. Sophie, maybe you can just reiterate. There's a question from Kate Hoare who says, I have a PCC meeting this week where I need to arrange a date for a finance meeting. Given Sophie's letter and the period of time set for mission community discussion set as up to March, would it be safe to say by the beginning of April, individual treasurers will have all the info they need to present to PCCs, and probably not before that?
Yes, so in terms of the kind of facts and figures, as I say, that should be with you much sooner, kind of by the beginning of first couple of weeks of February at the latest. But in terms of wanting feedback from the mission community meetings, then yes, waiting for April would be the better bet. By the end of March, mission communities should have met. So anything that's discussed there can then be fed into those conversations.
That's great. Thank you. Just scrolling through some more questions. James Richards asks, please can you send the cost of ministry figures through to clergy incumbents, mission community leaders, as well as to treasurers?
Absolutely. Sorry, I should have said that, but yeah, we will definitely do that. Yeah.
From Margaret Irving, timescale for decisions on the offer partnership agreement seem to depend on when the church warden admissions will be. When will we know those dates? Derek, I don't know, is that one for you? Or one for Richard?
I think it's for Richard.
Yeah, Richard.
Sorry, I'm just finding my, remind
So
me the
the question was, Richard, the timescale for decisions on the offer partnership agreement seem to depend on when the church warden admissions will be. When will we know those dates?
The church warden admissions, we've already started the process of that. They have to be 2 or 3 weeks after the last date of the APCMs to allow for all of the paperwork to be completed. So the last date for APCMs is now the end of May. So the church warden's admissions begin mid-June and run through to July. And certainly in the West, we've not done them in August because of it being summer holidays. And then by September, it's as it were too late. So the church warden's admissions are done in June and July. But the partnership agreements can be done before that, so that they're kind of ready to be presented at the offer presentation, which we do at the same time as the admission of church wardens. So for the admission of church warden services, what we do is we get not only church wardens and clergy to come, but also treasurers to come as well. And it seems to work really well.
Thanks, Richard. Just going back to some earlier questions, one which I've missed, and maybe it's something, Derek, that you could pick up on. It's from David Batten, who asks, why has the rate of inflation been chosen as the target? Why do we not aspire for a faster increase in stipends to encourage recruitment, for example, or less in a context where many wages are rising at a slower rate than inflation? Sorry, you're on mute, sir.
The inflation target for stipend increase, it starts from the basis that the clergy stipend and housing package should be set at a level commensurate with them living what we might say reasonably and enabling them to focus on their ministry. So if you buy that argument that that's the purpose of the stipend, to enable the clergy to focus on their ministry, and if you make the assumption that the level at the start of the period is correct, then if the cost of living goes up, then the stipend should also go up by the same amount. Obviously, there's quite a few if you buy that arguments in there, but that's the basis for picking inflation and saying basically it's set at a level which is reasonable, allows them to focus on the ministry. If it goes up, we should increase it. If the cost of living goes up, we should increase the stipend by the same amount. So that's the rationale.
Great, thanks, Derek. Okay, so just before we come to a close, I suppose it's time for a shameless plug for a few upcoming events for treasurers. So if you can just share the slide, please, Joe, thank you. So there's a couple of Pine P evenings that, in the next couple of weeks, I think they are, yeah, which is just a great opportunity for treasurers to come together, enjoy some good food, share conversations, learn from one another, and most importantly, they're an opportunity for us as a diocese to sincerely thank you all for all your what is vital and hard work. And Sunday, okay. I think somebody's unmuted, so if you can mute yourself, that'd be great. Thank you. From Sunday the 23rd to Sunday the 30th of April, our diocese will be holding its first ever Legacy Week, helping churches to sensitively and confidently encourage this type of giving. And it's important because each year churches in the diocese receive on average 80 gifts in wills, which totals over £1 million, and that's vital income. So this online training will explore how to find out what Legacy Week is and how to get involved, and learn how to answer common questions which might be asked about how to leave a legacy to your church. It's open to anyone in the church who's interested in promoting legacy giving, including PCC treasurers, legacy officers, clergy, stewardship officers, gift aid officers, or members of the PCC. We're also conscious that there are quite a few newish treasurers, and I've seen from the chat that that's the case tonight out there, and we've not had a chance to meet the finance team at Church House. Obviously the pandemic didn't help with that, so this informal Zoom, which is on your screen, is an opportunity to meet Rick and the team. They'll be on hand to answer your questions, and you could drop in for 10 minutes or stay for the full hour to hear from other new treasurers too. All the relevant booking details are on the slide, and more information can also be found on the Diocesan website's Resource for Treasurers page. And finally, I suppose we all like it when a bit of money comes our way. Well, the diocese has received around £200,000 from the church commissioners to help support those parishes facing significant financial pressures as a result of increases in their energy bills. Some of the fund will be used to help fund churches that are acting as warm places or hotspots for their communities. For more information or to make an application, please visit the Diocesan website and search National Church Energy Support Fund. And remember that applications must be received by, I think it's Rick, Saturday the 14th of January. So you don't have long left to apply. Great. And if I can just hand over to Richard for a few closing prayers.
Thank you. So first of all, let us pray for Derek and Rick and Sophie and John and Dave, giving thanks for all their service of our diocese and of the church in it. And we pray for each other and ourselves. O Lord Jesus Christ, who by your incarnation sanctified material things to be the means of your grace, and perpetuated that in the sacraments. Grant us a right understanding of the nature of money, and a generous heart in the use of the wealth you have committed to our stewardship, that by our sacrifices we may glorify you, who with the Father and the Holy Spirit are ever to be glorified. Amen.
Thanks, Richard. It just goes to me to say, first off, thank you to Richard, thanks to Derek, thanks to Sophie, thanks to Rick. Also, important thanks go to John Thompson, who's been in the background making all the technology work for us. But most importantly, a huge thank you goes to every one of you who's taken the time and trouble to join us tonight. I'm just really conscious that this is just yet another Zoom meeting for you to come along to, but we think it's a really important one, and the subject matter is important, so we really appreciate your time. Of course, if you have any further questions or queries about what you've heard, then please do make contact with us via the email which is on your screen now. And as Derek said before, I know that he, Sophie, Rick and others will be more than happy to answer any queries you have. It just leaves me to say good night, thank you for all you continue to do to support the growth of God's kingdom in Cumbria, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.